Hello everyone, welcome to another episode of Gravity Sketch Design Sync, a place to talk all things design. In this episode, we will be talking with Patrick Hanenberger. He's going to be talking with us about his journey and his career. Patrick has been the production designer and art director at some really cool movies, like Rise of the Guardians, Lego 2, Monsters Against Aliens, Croods, among some others. He's also a faculty member at Art Center College of Design, and him and his wife have started an international design consultancy called The Newland. So really excited. Let's jump straight into it. Today we're going to be talking about your journey as a creative. The first thing to speak about, and I think it's a story that every creative, every designer has around how they ended up deciding that they wanted to pursue this career. And it usually goes back to when you were little. So can you tell us a little bit about that?
You're absolutely right. That's the same for me. So I didn't decide that I wanted to be a designer when I was little, but I designed my whole life basically without knowing it. So since I can remember, had a great desire to draw all the time, and I was drawing constantly, mainly animals and space battles, and the kind of the advent of the mid-late 1980s, there was a huge kind of toy and commercial boom, around the world, where there was all this kind of American content that was just syndicated all across the world. And so I fell victim to, shows like Masters of the Universe, or the original Star Wars trilogy, or Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles, Mask, all those things that were just bombarded, to living rooms all around the world. And so this fascination of creating worlds that then become toys that then you can consume somehow, that was something that was ingrained into me at a very early stage. The other big passions I had was I loved building miniature models. So I had a model train and I would build, resin model kits. And I just loved the idea of like kit bashing things together and building physical models. And then as I grew a little bit older, I was introduced into computer graphics. So that was in the early 90s, the Commodore 64, the Amiga 500, those computers, those home computers that were just very powerful, and they had tools like Deluxe Paint where you could actually start creating images. So combining all those things with model making and this kind of content creation and computer graphics is what led me to wanting to become a designer. So when I had to decide what I wanted to do with my life after I graduated from high school, I decided to pursue a design degree. And I actually started off in graphic design, like so many of us, because I just didn't know what else was out there. Graphic design is something that your parents knew what it was. And so that's like an honorable trade that you can learn and become a graphic designer. And so after studying that for several years and doing several internships at advertising companies and designing things like, food packaging or annual reports, it didn't really satisfy me at all. And right around that time, there was a movie that came out, which was the episode 1, which was the Star Wars prequel. And with that movie, there was a book released called The Art of Episode 1. And that was a making of book where you could see all the drawings and all the computer designs that went into making that movie. And so after seeing that book, I felt like my eyes were open, and I finally realized what I wanted to do with my career is that I wanted to design for film or video games. I wanted to design for these fictional worlds. And so after reading that book, I could understand in the back there was a list of concept artists. I learned what a concept artist was. I learned what an art director was, what a production designer was. And so with that, I kind of switched my career path, and I actually switched universities, and I moved to California and went to the Art Center College of Design. And from there on, things fell into place very quickly. So, but yeah, to answer your question, it started at a very, very early age when I was probably around 5 or 6 that I started doing what I do now, and I still do it. I just didn't know at the time that that's what it was.
I've had a similar journey, not exactly the same, but it's also that I knew that I wanted to make things. I used to always make things when I was young, but I knew that I wasn't an artist. And I didn't really know that design existed. And then once I saw one of my friend's sister making a chair, and I asked her what was she making, and she said that she was making her homework. I was like, what? Like, is this your homework? I want to do what you do. So yeah, it seems like design ends up just finding us as opposed to like, yeah, being a normal career path that people usually take.
And then did you jump then right into industrial design after that, or did you?
Yeah, so this was when I saw my friend's sister. I was like 10 years old, so I still had to like grow up a lot. But by the time I had to pick what I wanted to do, I already knew that industrial design was going to be the thing. Back then, my brain tends to be like, I want to do this. What's the biggest thing that you can do about it? And so I was like, okay, industrial design, I want to make cars because it's like the coolest thing, but I just don't want to make cars only. I want to have a car company. And like, obviously I started studying design, and I had like my focus changed completely to a different side of things. I started to like know other things that existed within design. I didn't ended up doing car design, although yeah, my career has somehow taken me in that direction as well for some reason.
Yeah.
But
Interesting.
yeah,
It does
anyhow,
kind of find you, doesn't it? It does find you in a way.
Exactly. Which, I mean, I don't know if we were fortunate that
it for sure.
Us, right?
I mean, fortunate. I mean, I think being a designer is a huge privilege. I mean, it's a huge privilege. That's probably like one of the best jobs in the world you can have. People pay you to come up with stuff that you innovate, and you shape the world, and you in some ways you become a tastemaker, and it's a huge privilege to be able to go to a design school first of all, and then to actually make your living this way. So I'm grateful every day that I can do the things that I love to do as a 5-year-old, and now I see my daughter do it. So you see, this is our studio, she has a corner back there, and she paints, and she sculpted her first little creature the other day out of Sculpey, and she's 5 years old, and she's got the bug too, and she's
Nice.
creating, and that joy, I think, is something that is so innate to us as a species, as humans, that we want to create, and to be able to be privileged enough to be able to do that and afford that as a lifestyle, I think is something very special. So I'm very like you said, I feel very fortunate about it.
Yeah, 100%. I'm with you on that one. And yeah, you spoke a little bit about the different tools that you were using even growing up, and now your daughter is also doing different types of creative work to just essentially make things, express herself, and you were doing it when you were younger, like with this computer graphics software that you were discovering, even the model making, and like all the different avenues that you would take to make. So I'm wondering how there's this kind of like connection between what you have in your head, the ideas that you have in your head, and the creative kind of like drive that you have with the tools that you're going to end up using to materialize it. But then do you think it's like what goes first? It's like a chicken and egg sort of thing, right? Like, is it your creativity, the one that it's just finding things to make stuff, or is it that the things that you have available are the ones that are kind of like driving your creative flow?
That's really interesting that you mentioned that. Thinking back, so at my very early beginnings, I was actually not the best drawer or art student in class. I was kind of average. And, I mean, if you have a bad teacher or two early on, it can really crush your whole journey and spirit. So it was really, again, I was really fortunate so that even though I wasn't the best person at drawing or painting, I had a very vivid imagination, and I had parents that allowed me to express that through different ways, whether that was taking like theater classes or music lessons, or giving me lots of time just to build and create on my own. For example, when I was really into, action figures, Masters of the Universe, when I was about 8 years old, my parents would not buy me those big play sets, so I had to make my own play sets. So I would make my own play sets out of cardboard boxes. So grocery boxes, those little nets that come in, the oranges come in that, and I would make little like traps for the figures to fall into, and I would paint, the skulls on the walls. So I was really good at that. I was really good at making this immersive world for my action figures. But had I gone the traditional route, which is, you have to be able to render in a graphite pencil, and then you have to get 100% on your test so that you can go to art school, I would have never succeeded. And so I feel like so many students get squeezed through that mold, and design just doesn't work that way, So I do believe that you have to have a certain tool set as a foundation to communicate your ideas. And that's what I always tell my students is you have to have tools to communicate your ideas, to convince the other person of your idea, because they don't know what's in your head. But that's it. It's a tool to convince your idea. You have to have the idea. So I think you have to have the drive first and the ideas, and then you have to kind of utilize the tools around you that are there. And that's how you create great designers, the tools become second. And I see this all the time. I see this constantly with my students, that, if you give them the wrong tool at the wrong time, they get crushed and they lose their entire spirit. And so I would have probably not been able to study design in Germany, because in Germany they have this thing called a numerus clausus, like a GPA. And just because there's very few design schools and very few spots available, you had to have a very high GPA to get into one of those schools. And the schools are all government public schools. So there's really like limited spaces for it, because it's not seen as a big broad thing that you should study. It's a very niche thing. And my GPA would not have probably been high enough to get a spot. I would have probably had to go work for a few years and then earn my way to go to university later. So who knows if it would ever have all panned out. But again, I was very fortunate that my parents send me abroad since a very young age to go study abroad, and go to England, go to Australia, go to different places. And so they encouraged me to leave right away and go to America. And so I actually studied in America, where things are a lot looser and more free spirited and rogue. It's still a bit more frontier in that way. So things worked out that way.
Yeah, well, yeah, it's a really good point, and I agree with you. It's, what is it that you're going to end up using to express what you have in your head, full stop. That's all you need, right? As long as you can understand it and kind of like continue communicating with yourself or communicate it to the others, that's it, right? But somehow we end up just going through this train of, you need to learn all of these tools and become really good at all of these different ways of expressing yourself. And there's a reason for that, right? Because everyone is trained that way, right? So you end up speaking the same language as the other people, but then it can backfire. As you say, if you end up thinking that, these are the tools that I need to be using to express myself, and I'm not good at it, then it means that probably I'm not creative, or probably I'm not good at my job, and I should be thinking about some other career path.
It can be really devastating, for sure, and so it's and I've always made that a point in my, now that you bring this up, it's so interesting because I never thought about it, but I've always cross-pollinated tools and ideas. So to give an example, when I was an early student at the University of Michigan, there was a program that we learned which was called Electric Image, and it was like or Electric Image, and it was like a 3D modeling and animation program. And as soon as I got a hold of that, I thought, oh wow, this is so great. I can start making little movies with this. And so I would make little movies of just cubes and cylinders flying around, and I would make them into little spaceships. So right away you can cross-pollinate with that. Or when I was studying at the art center, I was actually in automotive design, kind of like you, but I would do automotive design, but I would design vehicles from children's books. So there's one of the children's books that I loved to read as a kid when I grew up, and it's all centered around a vehicle. So my thesis project was that I was going to design that vehicle, but I used all the traditional car design techniques. So making like templates, and tape drawings and laser cutting like cross sections and then sculpting it out of clay. And it was completely sticking out like a sore thumb. I mean, around me were these Range Rovers and Ferraris and BMWs. And then there was this little like children's choo-choo train, and but it was full circle. It was like I was a 6-year-old kid. I made the figurines, I made the little sculptures, I put like little cotton in the thing, and I painted a background for it, made a diorama. And the chair of the transportation design department actually really loved it. And he at the time decided that this is actually really great that you're using transportation design skills to expand, what we do. And he gave me the prime spot in the student gallery that year, right at the entrance, to feature this project. And it was very reassuring. So those to me are good examples of teachers and leaders that encourage innovation and cross-pollination and collaboration rather than following a certain regiment that, the regiment changes every 5 years anyway. So it's those were kind of like highlights in my career, my education career.
A good teacher is always going to mark your journey. That teacher as well, unfortunately.
It really shapes you, doesn't it?
Yeah, exactly. So let's talk a little bit about your time at Art Center. Did you ended up going to study transportation design? Was it because the entertainment program wasn't available yet, and then you ended up to just having to figure out one route, and just within that route ended up doing what you do? Or did you actually wanted to become a car designer, but then figured out that you could just use those tools for something else that you wanted to end up pursuing?
That's an excellent question. So I went to Art Center in 2000, so 21 years ago, and there was no entertainment design program established yet at the time. There was one class that you could take called entertainment design, and that it was kind of a hybrid between industrial design with themed entertainment. So when I took entertainment design at Art Center, we would make chess figures, for example, but we had to build the chess figures and make them ourselves. But then we could basically create a world around these chess characters. So we could create an imaginary setting. So that was kind of the idea behind that. The class was taught by a very kind professor called Norm Sherman. And he was kind of really, really eager to connect that industrial design and entertainment field, but there wasn't a whole program for it. And to go back to my kind of aha moment where I saw my first Art of book, The Art of Episode 1, I saw Doug Chang's work and Jay Schuster's work and Terrell Whitlatch's work in there. And I realized that, looking at people like Doug Chang and Jay Schuster, they have all studied industrial design or car design or had some kind of an affiliation with transportation design. And that to me actually made a lot of sense to study something that is a very prestigious old program that has a very broad skill set that you can apply to so many different things. So I went into transportation design and Art Center because I loved the program and the what it taught you, which is research, rapid fast sketching, three-dimensional prototyping, and the latest software at the time that was available. So to me, that was the best program you could actually study as a designer. I didn't really have the intention to become a car designer. I thought that might be something that is interesting to me. And my brother works in automotive, and my father works in automotive. So I come from and my grandpa worked in automotive. So I come from a car family. It's the DNA is there, but I wanted to do vehicles for movies. That was kind of my dream. Like if I can design a vehicle and get that into a movie one day, that would be I'd be done. That's all I wanted to ever achieve. And so it was really, I think even if the entertainment design program had been there at the time, I think I would have still studied transportation design because it just felt like a really solid program. Again, creating a design brief, research, rapid fast sketching, 3D graphics, bleeding edge, 3D visualization, and physical prototyping. And those were all the things to me that made a lot of sense, that with that skill set, you can really work in any field of design and be successful at it. And my first job was actually, sorry to add to that. So then my first job right after school was I worked at the Lego company for a while, and I designed some concepts for Lego. So that was the perfect example of vehicles combined with industrial design. And then after that, I was hired by Dreamworks Animation to actually design all the cars for one of their movies called Over the Hedge. So they needed someone who can just draw cars, and they wanted kind of realistic looking cars, and they were an animation studio. So they said, oh, one of my teachers at the time, Christian Shalawalt, he hired me and saying, oh, Patrick knows how to draw cars. So it worked out actually really fast, right after I graduated, which is funny.
It ended up being a great thing that you took a different route, which is, it's something that people don't think about so much. It's like, okay, I want to be like, I want to do this, I'm going to do all the different steps that people say you need to be doing, but then you end up maybe not being seen, or not being able to like just show how different you are, and people getting to appreciate that difference, like your teacher putting you in the prime spot in the show because you were doing something completely different.
I always tell my students is you have to have a drive, you have to go in one direction, but you have to be fluid enough to bounce around if it doesn't work out. So if you're only stuck on this one thing that you say, I have to design X for company Y, that's all I would ever want to do, then yeah, some people succeed in that and they get their dream, but most of them won't. It's a 1 in 1,000 kind of approach. And so the approach I've taken and that I encourage my students to take is to have a direction and go in it, create that momentum, but be a little bit more like a ping pong ball that you can actually bounce around and still get to somewhere. It might just take a detour every once in a while. And that's kind of how my path has been, is that you have a drive, but you are open to detours to get where you need to go. And that makes the journey so much more interesting. It sounds like your path was a little bit like that too.
It was, so a little bit. My path was, I started industrial design. I ended up falling in love with problem solving. So I'm more of this kind of like industrial designer that wants to solve problems, and ended up doing some furniture, some product, but always felt like I needed some extra tools because I wanted to disrupt things in the world. So I always put the example of, like they would come and tell me redesign this blender, and I could redesign how it looked like, how it was going to be used, the ergonomics, the materials maybe that it was going to be made of. But I wanted to know what was inside of the blender. Like, how could I disrupt the way in which food is just destroyed, right? And I felt I didn't have those skills, which now in retrospect, I'm like, I could have just destroyed a blender and figure out what was in there, and I don't know, but at that point in my life, I was like, I need some sort of like more education to like show me the path. And that's how I ended up in London doing my master's. That was called Innovation Design Engineering at the Royal College of Art, where Gravity Sketch was created. I don't know if you knew that it was a degree project. So in there, I was going to learn engineering tools that would allow me to disrupt the products that I was making. I just basically discovered this new thing, like these new tools that I could bring into my toolset, which were technology, right? And I use technology to bring, the ideas that I have to life. And that's how I kind of like work in a way. And then I ended up creating a company, and now I'm the founder of a company. So yeah, my life has done this.
So can you define for me the spark? Because VR has been around for a long time, right? And so then, and design has been for a long time. So what was the spark? Was there like a specific project or a specific aha moment, your eureka moment that you had where you then put this together, the industrial design and virtual reality? Can you describe that for me?
Yeah, so it wasn't that we were looking into doing something for VR or AR, because at that point Gravity Sketch was made for using augmented reality, but we didn't start it like that. We started with just one idea: how can we enable people to materialize their ideas in the quickest and most intuitive way? Full stop, that was it. So the whole project was around understanding how people think when they're going through a creative process, what tools do they use, what limitations do they have, and ended up creating a series of really low-tech experiments, really no-tech experiments, really just like, let's really understand how people think when they're going through a creative process. And through that, we ended up creating one experiment that was this layers cube. It was basically a cube that had layers of acrylic, like transparent acrylic, and we would come to people and tell them, okay, think about the shape, now slice it, and draw each of the slides on the layers of acrylic. Now put them back together, move it around, and you're going to see the shape that you have in your head. Because we wanted people to be able to express things really quickly, like a rough representation of what they had in their head, easy way. And that cube was really successful. Like people were really seeing in a rough way what they had in their head and being able to express it. So we said, okay, let's make this cube bigger so people can make like bigger things and more detailed. It became really, cumbersome, really difficult to use, and it was heavy. So we said, okay, it would be amazing if you would only have one layer of acrylic that you would sketch on, and then you would move the layer of acrylic, but then the sketch that you had sketched would just stay floating in air. And you could just have that layer, sketching on that layer all over the space. And we thought, okay, actually you can do it. You can use augmented reality to make that happen. Perfect, let's use augmented reality. So it was almost at the end of the project where we ended up bringing augmented reality into the picture.
Wow, that is super inspiring. I love that idea of the acrylic sheet that you can move around, and I never thought of that. And then you could create layers of it, and then you actually would have a three-dimensional drawing that you could look at.
Exactly. So
I might have to steal that for my teaching.
Go for it.
I'll give you credit for it. But when I teach three-dimensional drawing to my students, I use a potato. And I have them draw Sharpie line with the Sharpie, with the pen, draw contour lines on it. And then they can rotate it around and they can see, look, this is how you see this three-dimensional form, these lines actually turning as they, how you rotate the potato around. So I have them draw an X cross section and a Y cross section, so they have a grid on there, and you can rotate it around. But yours is a lot more elegant, so I like that.
Well,
very good.
There you go.
Very good.
So yeah, and you can still see some reminiscence of that experience that we created in the iPad version and in the VR version. Like you still have in the VR version, you have the drawing plane that you can use. In the iPad version, that's actually how you end up creating something with the drawing plane. So that's how it was. It's really about just following a creative process to end up making something useful for whoever you're making it, as opposed to starting with the idea of I want to make this for this tech, or end up having this result.
Well, like I always said to the EDU team, is that's what it really shows through in the program. You can tell that this has an intent, and the intent is to get you to design in 3 dimensions as fast as possible. And that's why it's great. And that's why I beg you not to add all these features in there, because you don't need them, because if you want to do high-end modeling, there's then other programs that do that, right? So the way I use this professionally, Gravity Sketches, I do the conception and the getting it as a team to look at it, 2 or 3 people at the same, evaluate, and then we give this to an expert who's maybe a really good high-res modeler, who then takes this Gravity sketch and reses that up. And that's been working great. And then we bring that back into Cocreate and review it again and do notes on it and draw over it and review it, and then it goes back again. So this in and out of Gravity is working really well for us. That it's it's really a design tool, not a modeling tool. It's a design and creation tool, and that's a big difference. It's the difference between a laser cutter and a pen. A pen is a design tool, and a laser cutter is a manufacturing tool. So they're not to be confused. even though
That's
they're very
really cool.
similar. You know,
Yeah.
they're both drawing on a surface, but they're very different things.
Yeah, that's a really good way of putting it. I mean, we love when our users end up like just saying what Gravity Sketch is in a much better way than we do.
Yeah, it's the pen, right? So if you know, use any, you know, alias Maya is the laser cutter, and you know, Gravity is the pen. So that's how I view it.
Yeah, and they're both useful and necessary, right? But at different
Absolutely,
stages of the process.
absolutely.
Yeah. So let's talk a little bit about your creative process then. You touched on, you know, how you work with your team a little bit, but let's start with, what do you do when you're like starting to think about an idea? As a designer, like as a product designer, for example, you end up thinking about, you know, what the end user is going to be doing with the product, let's say. But in your case, I think that, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, but your end goal is to create an emotion, right? With whatever you're creating and designing. So
that's right.
How's your creative process like?
That's right. I think the so designing for movies is exactly that. It's creating an emotion, and that emotion has to be complementary to what the emotional point of the story at that time is in that movie. So if you have a scene, so usually my process works this way. So usually I work from script pages. So the writer or the director, you know, write the idea for the scene on a piece of paper. And then there's a discussion with the director of what that scene is supposed to do in the film, and how at that moment the audience is supposed to feel like. So let's say it's an action sequence that needs to really energize the audience, but it also needs to be funny. And so out of that, I usually start with a pen and I write down a few keywords of what it needs to be. So, you know, color schemes or camera lens angles, or shapes, overall shapes, just some really broad ideas that I can then communicate to my design team very easily. And then the second step is usually gathering a bunch of reference imagery. So doing some research on kind of tapping into the brain and seeing what's, you know, what images does this evoke? And I start with the mood board. And then after that, I go into sketching and I sketch little thumbnails. And so in the case of a movie, usually it's environments first. So the scenery, the sets, because that's what 90% of the movie is the scenery, you know, and the actor, the character, but that's a separate thing. And then usually some quick little sketches just to kind of see what we could do, what kind of imagery could evoke that emotion that the director is trying to communicate. So if it's a action scene that's supposed to be energetic, again, going all the way back to graphic design, diagonal shapes, overlapping shapes, crooked angles, triangles, that translates to camera language, to wider angles, Dutch cameras, you know, more extreme camera compositions. But it also needs to be funny. So that means that everything in there should be well lit and bright so that the audience can understand everything and feel safe. Color helps to make things funny and more emotional. So in the case of a high action sequence with comedic content, you know, crazy camera angles, colorful, and again, that you can then right away translate into little thumbnails and little sketches. And once I have a then clear idea of what that thumbnail is, I usually do a little drawing. It's about, you know, I'll show you, like, it's about this big. So it's about this big. That's how big it is. And then after that, I usually take that into a program like Gravity Sketch and I start sketching and figuring things out. So where would this actually be dimensionally? So in the case of an environment, I might have some really basic shapes in mind. And then in Gravity, I would start blocking that in right away with three-dimensional line work. Or before Gravity, it would have been, you know, Photoshop. So using like a 2D program to sketch it out. And so the design process, to come back to your question, it's a lot of back and forth with the director and the writer of what they're trying to write in that moment, what kind of emotion they're trying to evoke, and then falling back to really basic tools like graphic design to combining different things like color palettes and shape language to put those all into a moving image together. I hope that makes sense to you. It's very, I try to really break it down on the most abstract level. but it's really that basic.
It's really that basic, only that you need to combine the like really creative, talented mind that you have inside of your head.
Well, the thing is with movies, it's sequential design. So it's a serious, product is basically a product that's static, and a movie as a product in itself is a moving experience. So you have to be able to just create lots of things that go with an understanding of what comes after what. So it's a series of products in a way, and every product is, a prop or a vehicle or a set piece. Those are all just individual industrial design problems that you just have to string them together to create a narrative in a way.
It's all industrial design products in a way, but I think, at some point I spoke with some friends from entertainment design at Art Center. I studied at Art Center for a little bit. So.
Oh yeah. Oh cool.
Yeah.
When was that?
Sorry?
When was that?
It was 2 times. Once I went there for a summer program, which was, I think it was 2006, maybe. So.
Oh, I was teaching there at the time, so we might have crossed paths.
Yeah, maybe. I was in the other campus, the one, not in the hillside one, the South Campus.
The South Campus, yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and then a second time, which was, I started my master's degree there, and then I ended up going to London instead. So I was there for a month. Yeah.
Very small world.
So
what did your friends in entertainment say? You're saying
they were trying to explain what entertainment design was, because I had no idea that it existed. And I think at that point, entertainment design had just started as a program at Art Center. So they were still studying something else. I think they were studying transportation design. And they were saying, well, the only, the difference is that you end up not being limited by what the world can make, or how the world can behave. You just have endless possibilities because you're doing a movie.
That's true in terms of illustration, and if you do editorial work or kind of futurism work, let's say if your idea is supposed to be to come up with some crazy concepts for NASA, but in a movie world, it's often actually very, very surgical. It has to actually be, because you only have a few seconds to explain it. So, and the design has to always exist within the context of the narrative, the story, because the movie is a narrative. And so you might have the coolest design that's the most interesting and innovative, but it might completely disturb you because it is too distracting from what you're supposed to look at in that specific scene. So it's in a way, yes, anything goes. You're not tied to gravity. If you work in visual effects or animation, you're not tied to gravity. You're not tied to physical structures. However, you are tied to the script, and the script is king. The story that you're trying to convey. Well, we've actually started using Gravity Sketch as a replacement for our design studio for our art team. So we are using the tool actually far beyond just the design inception tool. We're actually using it as a review room. So we now meet in Gravity Sketch, and we have right now about 4 of us working together, and we will actually take 2D concept art and we'll put it in the VR room around us. So we have the artwork around us, and you can walk from painting to painting, and you can talk about it, and you can notate it with using the line tool, and doing the 3D set building on top of that. So we are actually using it as a for a movie set. I'm building the set with my artists, but I'm also standing on the set, and I'm also standing in the art room all at the same time, because I can adjust my scale, as you know, very easily. And so I can go to camera level down to the street. I can zoom out and review the model all by myself, looking at it from every angle. Plus I can see the sketches are all around it, embedded in the virtual scene. So another way we're using it is to for scouting, so for camera scouting. So I'm actually using the camera tool to take screen grabs and snap and evaluate, which again is brilliant, that I'm able to adjust the focal length, again, which is a great thing because it changes the way things look. And I can then evaluate and review the set with my artists as if I'm standing on there, like on a mocap stage. And so um, it's become so much more than just a creation tool. It's really become a communication tool for us. Working through the pandemic has been very difficult. Working with the artists on my team, because as you know, design needs interaction, needs communication. You need to be able to sit with someone and sketch something or look at a 3D model and toggle it around. But right now our hands are tied. We're just communicating through screens. So having the co-creation room has been really a blessing for us, that we can continue to do design reviews the same way we would at a studio. So,
Wow.
and the great thing is for me, because I really enjoy how simple it is to use Gravity. So someone like me who's not a very good modeler, I know the basics in Maya, Modo, Blender, Alias, but I'm not really I'm not an expert at it. I can navigate around and move things, but with Gravity, I can really get in there and I can move, NURBS around, and I can reshape surfaces very easily. So I can really interact with my 3D artists and shape what they're working on and really get in there. And again, that is just such a time saver, So traditionally, you would look at a 3D model, you would take a snapshot, then you would take it back to your desk and then do a sketch over that, and then give that back to the artist. But with Cocreate, we are just in there, and that is all gone. Like that's like all those hours are gone, because I just adjusted right on the model with them while they're standing next to me. We've used it as an individual creation tool, but also as a review tool and a collaboration tool during the pandemic, to keep the art team, which works all over the world, continuously working together.
That's really interesting, and I wonder how that's going to change once the pandemic is over. Like, I mean, I imagine you're going to keep some things, and I imagine your workflow has changed. As in, before you would have, maybe some designs for the set, but maybe they were scale, right? You couldn't go inside of them and check out the different camera angles to understand how a scene was going to look like. And now you're doing that. Is that actually changing the way in which you design, and kind of like the results, basically? Are you seeing different results now from the workflow that you now adopted?
Tremendous changes. Yeah, it's a total game changer for me, because it accelerates everything so much. And so as a production designer, my job is to communicate what the film will look like to the director. So even with me just screen sharing what I see in VR, I can show the director, who might just be on a tablet or on a flat, computer. But even me being the camera and navigating through the set very naturally and changing focal lengths accelerates the whole scouting and layout process, which in CG animation takes a long time to find the right camera angles to make the set look good. So now I'm actually really able to do that in the art department. And we've done this in the past 20 years, but it was always clunkier. It was usually required a technical artist to drive the camera and to get us through the spaces. And then later on, we were able to hold camera rigs that we could then that were motion capture tracked on mocap stages, so the director could look through cameras and see things in real time. But now I'm actually can be in there myself, and I can, if the director thinks this is too small, I can make it a bit bigger. If the director thinks this needs to be moved over, I can move it over. If it needs to have a quick annotation that I do, I can just draw directly in the scene three-dimensionally. So it's that connection between artist, myself, and the director is just so much more fluid now. And I don't plan on going back. So even post-pandemic, I am fully anything 3D is now going to be through a headset, because I just don't see the point of going back. The trick is going to be for the VR industry is, can we get enough headsets out to people that are affordable? For someone like me and my artists, we're very much interested in the high-end graphics sector, making movies. So I don't know if the one single device approach would actually work for us, because the graphics power might not be strong enough. If we can get over that, then I see it being a bright future that lets us work remotely and make complex things like CG movies from anywhere in the world, really. So I don't plan on going back, really. I would like to, and that doesn't mean that everyone that I work with has to start now making models in Gravity. But even if they are now able to make their models in the platform that they choose, and we bring it into Gravity as a review, as the art room, like I said, as the studio. Gravity becomes the studio. Everybody loads their models in, and I get to look around and review it and fine tune it. That's all I really need. So yeah, I don't plan on going back. I'm hooked.
Good. I'm glad to hear that. um, yeah, I think it's really important to what you're saying there, that yeah, like everyone can just basically choose their own tool, right? At the end of the day, it's more what are you using to communicate together, and I think that's the most important part of it all. That's almost what we set out to do. It's just enable teams to communicate in the easiest way possible, right? A three-dimensional idea. But you were saying that you're also importing images to the images, right? So it's a whole
That's
studio
right.
then.
That's right. We have literally, when we work on a set, we have a map of the set, we have concept art, we have to-do lists, we have sketches from the director that we might need to reference, and it's all floating around us, and then we have the actual set. And anything is scalable. And I mean, you know this, you've made the software, but to the people that don't, is anything is scalable in real time, and you can, the cool thing about Gravity is that you can change your scale, so you can be at camera scale, or you can be at God scale, where you see the whole thing as a miniature below you very easily, and that's really powerful. And and when people ask me like, what's so great about Gravity, I say, it does what all the other modeling tools do. To be honest, it's the same stuff, but what is so different is the interactivity and the collaboration. And that's really for me when you guys when we beta tested the co-creation and jumped in, that's where things for me really started to pick up and really started to fall into place. Because I've been trying to get bodies of designers, groups of designers into VR for like the last 2 years, and they are social VR platforms where you can meet and you can gather, and there's amazing high-end tools where you can create individually. But until recently, I hadn't really found the right mix of the two, where I just need something to sketch and to block out things and to review models and 3D objects, and also meet other people and discuss design three-dimensionally. But once you're in, it's fantastic. So that's why I'm going to continue to push forward, even though after the pandemic, when we go back to studios, we will still continue to use headsets, because of just the entire 3D filmmaking nature of how we make sets and how we make environments. And there's no better way to design than just do it directly, in a virtual reality in real time. Not even mentioning the fact that we have artists all over the world. So we have artists in Europe, artists in Asia, Australia, all around the globe. And again, being able to just connect into the same virtual scene in real time, for a device that gets more and more affordable is fantastic. I mean, that's unthinkable 5 to 10 years ago.
How come you have designers all over the world? Is it because of the pandemic, or is it something that it's normal?
When my wife and I started our studio, we decided to work globally, to be able to hire the most appropriate talent for every job that we do. So we have a design studio, and big studios and companies hire us to design projects for them, and then we usually staff up a small art team to cater towards those needs. And we didn't want to be bogged down to a certain talent pool, so we've always recruited from all over the world, because it's never been easier to do so. You have great recruiting platforms like LinkedIn or ArtStation, or great websites where you can find talent. And so our whole company concept has always been 2 people and 2 laptops. That's always the whole thing. And we've worked from all over the world ourselves. We love to travel. Before we had kids, we were very nomadic, and we lived in Europe for a while, and we would go all over the place there, and we would just continue working. It was just so natural because of once you have a server set up, and you have clients who are willing to work remote, which now again has become the new norm. But 5 years ago that was new and different, and So that's something we've just always done since we started our company in 2015, to have talent from all over the world, because we wanted to work with artists that would fit the specific need of a project and be able to hire those artists. And when you're on a production, it's also very helpful because you can actually work around the clock. So when you hire people from different time zones, you can work on a sketch. You can hand that sketch over to someone to do a rough model, and then that person hands it off to the next person, and that does a rendering of that. And then in the morning, you have a visualized scene right in front of you while you slept. So it's a lot of that has to do also with, we always work in teams, in our studio. So we always have a team structure. It's never just the individual artist. It's always the design studio effort. And so that, to be able to work faster and more agile, we look often for talent in different time zones so that we can keep the work going around the clock.
Wow, that's really smart. And I guess the pandemic just made it easier. No, it's just become the norm for your clients, which I think it would have been the hardest part to explain to them, right?
Yeah, in the beginning we had clients that already knew us from 10 years prior, that we had worked together at big companies that then had moved on, and so there's a lot of trust there. But on a recent project that we got hired last year, the studio didn't know us, but they needed exactly what we offer. They need an art department for hire that knows how to make animated movies, and together my wife and I have almost 30 years of experience. So we know what we're doing, and we can do it all remotely. So you don't have to do anything. You just have to hire Margaret and myself, and then the rest is taken care of. So that's kind of the concept, and that's been going very well now since the pandemic, especially because the movie studios had to figure out how to work around this, and we basically had our infrastructure already in place. So it was a very, very good time, fortunate time in all this mess for us.
Yeah, some silver linings there. So you're moving to Germany, and you're going to just basically continue doing what you do, because two guys, two laptops.
That's right. There's no interruption. We're now working on a full big movie production, and there's absolutely no interruption in terms of the workflow. So we're moving there to spend some time with our family, and we wanted to do this before our kids are going to first grade. So right now they're still in kindergarten, and it's an easy shift. And we will be able to, again, since we have this around the world kind of team that works in different time zones, we're just now shifting to a different time zone. And the entire set production, set building, asset production, none of that will slow us down, because again, we're using VR. So all we need is a quick internet connection, which we will find, hopefully. And our laptops are coming with us. So yeah, we will be able to continue our work for a movie studio, just working from my hometown where I grew up, basically. So that's very exciting. It's the pandemic has brought a lot of open-mindedness to this way of working, obviously, because there's a necessity for it now. One thing I would always urge people, or if whoever listens to this, is there's still a very strong need for human connection. And I always say that we're only granted this way of working because we've worked locally for almost 20 years. So we have a deeply rooted network, with companies and clients and producers and directors. So in a way, we paid our dues, and we've earned our wings to now be able to do this. So I think if anyone who's wants to break into the design industry, especially for animated films, I still highly recommend moving close to the source. And there's multiple hubs now around the world. There's Los Angeles, obviously. There's Vancouver, which we also spent 2 years recently there. There is London, obviously. There's Sydney, Australia. There's big things happening in China. So there's hubs around the world. But if you want to have a fruitful, diverse, sustainable career, I still recommend that you move to those places for a while to, again, start to grow your network and cultivate your ecosystem of contacts. Because if you're just a freelancer, then and some people might like that. Some people love just making their art and using social media platforms as their outlet. But if you want to work on big productions and big teams, that is kind of the key baseline, that you have to have a level of trust and a human connection there to be allowed to do that kind of remote work. So it's hard to grow that when you're only working remotely.
No, that's really good advice, and it kind of like connects with my last question, which was going to be, well, it's actually two questions. One is, what would you say to someone that wanted to follow your path and end up doing what you're doing? And combined to that, what has been kind of like the most challenging thing that you found throughout your journey?
Oh, that's a tough question. I never I never know quite what to say to that, because you don't want to sound like a older person that is set in their way. So I think I'll start with the second part. So what's been the toughest for me has been the choice between being a individual creative who creates what they want to create. So let's say follow what's inside here. Let's say like I was talking about my childhood earlier, the cartoons that I watched and the movies that I watched and the stuff that I want to draw, like following that urge versus being a professional, because sometimes they don't overlap. Being a professional might mean managing a team, doing HR work, doing budgeting work, managing upwards expectations, managing downwards in terms of leadership. Those are all things that have actually really little to do with designing the actual project. And I've always been torn, trying to figure out what am I really. I think I know what I'm better at. I think I don't quite know yet what I'm happier doing. Do I want to just sit in my corner and draw like spaceships, or do I want to actually work on big, exciting productions and help shape big projects? I think I'm better at the latter, at actually working in complex environments and problem solving and having the art part just be one portion of that. But what I'm still internalizing and is really like, would I be happier if I only sat by myself and did this one thing that I really love to do? So check in with me in 10 years and I'll know more. But what I would just urge people that are aspiring to become designers in animation or in any kind of movie, entertainment, or video game industry is just to think about that, because those two are separate things. And if you say you want to, if your dream is to work on a big production and to work on a big movie and to see your name up on the big screen in the end, and just having worked with directors and production designers that you admire, then there's many ways you can get into that field. And then to those people, I would say, just get out there, do any kind of work that you can just to get close to that environment. For example, I worked for free for a couple of summers. I was an assistant to an agent, answering her phones. I was decorating sets for free on graduate student projects at MFI. So I think there's like lots of ways you can just kind of position yourself on that path. And then things will fall into place, because you'll grow your ecosystem, you'll meet producers, you'll meet directors, people will start to want to work with you because you're reliable and professional, and then your career grows that way. Or do you not care about any of this and you just care about the actual output that you produce, which is the art, the painting, the sculpture, whatever that is, and you don't care if you can actually live on this, you don't care if you can ever make enough money to actually pay the rent from that. If you, no matter what, you'll live in your parents' basement, or you'll work 2 or 3 jobs just to sustain this career. If that's something that you are so passionate about, then that's a different path, and don't confuse the two. So that's I think my advice. And I picked the professional route. So I've done lots of internships, and like I said, did some trainee programs, and started off as like a trainee junior artist and designed very basic things, and then worked my way, gaining more and more responsibility, then starting my own studio, and that's been very satisfying, and I enjoy that quite a bit, because I get to work on big projects and influence really the outcome of big pop culture shaping things. Now, do I have the strongest portfolio? If you look at my actual portfolio of artwork, the paintings, Probably not. There's a lot of people out there, thousands of people out there now that have much stronger Instagrams of cooler artwork that they're just doing it because they're doing it. And so I think that's my biggest advice that I always tell, my students as well, is kind of just calibrate yourself a little bit towards one or the other approach. Which one's more important to you? Is it the being a professional and making a living in this industry off that, or is it just no matter what, I just produce this art even if I never ever get hired to do a single painting?
Food for thought, guys, whoever is listening to us. All right, Patrick. Well, thank you so much for your time. It's been a pleasure talking to you.
Likewise. Thank you so much for the opportunity, and we'll be in touch and continue to work in gravity.